Hey, John Gilroy here. Artificial intelligence has grown up. How has it impacted the future of work in government? Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guests today are Joel Kruzwick, Federal CTO at GitLab, and Bob Ritchie, CTO at a company called SAIC. We are recording this at GitLab's DevSecOps World Tour in lovely downtown Washington, D.C. So my opening question is going to be very, very simple. Do we have any code warriors in the room? Do we have any code warriors in the room? Do we, Ritchie?
Yeah, no, I'll jump in there. I identify as a code warrior, among other things, for sure. Yeah, no, that's been what I've done my whole career, so I appreciate being here.
Yeah, earlier this morning, I saw Bob give a very thorough, detailed analysis of working with the government and using artificial intelligence to make life better, and that's why I want to focus in today. I want to have Joel maybe do some technical things, but mostly you, because I think you hit on a lot of key aspects, because people are saying, yeah, last summer I saw AI do those funny things. That's a lot of dazzle. Show me the money. How can it help me? Can it help me get home from work on time? Can it reduce costs? So can it really help? Can AI actually help the federal government? What kind of impacts can it have on working?
Yeah, no, I think, like you hit on, can it help get home from work on time? What I found most interesting about AI adoption and really leaning into AI adoption in a secure way is how much toil it can eliminate from our lives, and so it doesn't replace anybody. It doesn't replace the need for creative thought, creative design, and human reasoning, but it does eliminate a lot of that kind of tiresome, tedious workload that you can offload through automation. And really, this is not net new, right? AI is a 60-year-old, probably beyond that, but 60-year-old technology landscape. And automation has been really at the forefront the past 20, 30 years across the public sector. But what's been really fascinating over the last 2 years, kind of drafting off the large language model kind of advancements, are people starting to feel a much more approachable barrier for entry for adopting AI in their everyday lives, whether that's how I go about servicing a ticket on a help desk, or dealing with the latest Office products that I struggle with, combining PowerPoints and Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. So it really hits into that kind of corporate America market in a new way now that prior to 2 years ago was really thought to be a long way off.
How can AI help our federal technology people, make software development easier, reduce errors? How can it help?
Yeah, no, and I touched on it in the talk earlier. Thanks so much for the opportunity from GitLab to be here and talk about AI adoption. But the kind of ever-growing market space of the workforce in the technology space, and the kind of immaturity of it, with it doubling every 5 years, that means 50% of the entire workforce has 5 years or less experience. And so there, as you mentioned, error-prone. There's a lot of labor-intensive mentoring and kind of almost a tradecraft sort of studying of the art of kind of introducing technology to solve problems. But what goes along with that is a lot of tedious hand-holding, sometimes we'll call it motherhood of the kind of more entry level or early in their career or their experience developers in the ecosystem. And really where AI has really kind of bridged that gap is it's this nice, approachable, objective inject into that daily workflow or daily lives of technologists. It reduces the toil, it reduces the error rate. It takes away some of the waiting games that can happen, especially in remote teams where I've got a peer review hanging out there for 2 or 3 days. No one's paying attention to me in Slack. And why hasn't anybody reviewed this yet? Well, now you've got a member of your team that's giving you objective feedback, and also a really unbiased and we'll call it non-embarrassing way to learn from your mistakes right in your own development environment. So you break a lot more eggs locally, you're getting that feedback locally, and you're learning faster.
So Joel, is anyone ignore you on Slack?
I've never had that happen before, John.
You see,
Not
Bob,
ever.
it's only you.
I don't know what you're talking about, Bob. We're all cracking up as soon as he said that. We've all been there. Of course we have. Yeah.
So GitLab, there are people who don't know exactly what folks do. Give us a thumbnail sketch on how it can actually help our federal leaders.
It's interesting. We have to take a holistic approach, right? I can talk about features all day long. The reality is there's a holistic suite of features that's required to really move the needle, because all that we've been trying to do for years, whether it's Agile or DevSecOps or other automation, we've been talking for years about trying to break down these silos, right? Where does the work back up? Where do we have problems that we've created? with our processes, with our tooling. And so when I look at it today, a lot of times when we talk about, well, what can AI do for me? When I'm developing code, we talk about the code assistant, which is great. The code assistant is amazing. And I liken it to a conveyor belt. It's like I've sped up the conveyor belt and put 10 times more things on that conveyor belt. But at the end of it, there's nobody to catch things. And so it's just all falling on the floor and piling up. And so at some point, we're actually creating new silos, new backups of work, unless we have AI applied unilaterally kind of across the whole software development ecosystem.
When you mentioned that, I thought about Lucy Ricardo and that skit with working in the factory, things all falling apart. That's how it used to be. We're going to have to ask Bob how we can get the factory back in order. Yeah, Bob, we're real sophisticated here talking about Lucy Ricardo. but Joel is right. I mean, a lot of times in old waterfall methodologies, a bunch of people get together and try something and just spin their wheels and try and fail and try and fail and try and fail. And they try to patch in things in the back. They try to patch in security or bolt it on. But I think what AI can do is actually help shift left. And that's the words you used this morning, shift left in security. Is that correct?
Yeah, spot on. Shifting security left, shifting code quality left, all of these things, like Joel just mentioned, are a really imperative part of where AI can help. But the other point he stressed there is it can help across the entire funnel, if you will, the entire infinity life cycle, as it's often kind of depicted in the DevSecOps ecosystem, to ensure that we're not just accelerating and automating painful parts of the process to just create bottlenecks and painful work in progress for another part of the ecosystem. And the way it can bring, that's the other really amazing part of language models, is the way it can help you decompose a complex chunk of code or a large set of code changes in a single batch of a release. If I'm now a security team or an operations team that's considering, do I feel confident that this isn't going to break production, that this isn't going to introduce vulnerabilities, but I don't speak that language. I'm not a Go developer. I might know some Python if I'm a cyber guy. I might know a little bit of Ansible and some scripting languages if I'm an ops guy. But I don't necessarily understand the code that's being introduced. What the AI injection at that part of the workflow can also do is help me understand, and it really bridges that trust that's necessary for a successful DevSecOps culture, right? So if we think of removing the tools, removing anything else about the DevSecOps ecosystem, it's really about a high-trust culture that is foundational on a common set of tools, a common source of truth, and a high degree of empathy across those legacy silos. AI does a great job. In the same way, in the public world, we think about, the Google Translate, the ability to, on the fly, you see those commercials where they're saying, like, hey, can I jump in? And the kids, skateboarding one time, playing basketball in another country next, and breakdancing in a third, because it's translating on the fly. That same language barrier exists across silos of work, and AI and DevSecOps really breaks those language barriers down and brings the team together.
Well, Bob, I'm going to take you back to sixth grade and something called code review. Because for most developers, if you bring up the topic of code review, it's like, Bob, report to the principal's office. And people, I don't want to get yelled at. I'm sick. It's the last thing I want to do. You want to go out and maybe even learning math would be preferable to something. And so code review can not make you a lot of friends with software developers, but AI can help with it, can't it?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a couple of interesting anecdotes around code review. I'll say is there's this funny paradox that if I only change 2 lines of code, I end up getting hundreds of comments about, wow, that's the worst code I've ever seen, or great job, and you get all this conflict. And then if I change enough code, people just say, LGTM passes the bar. It passed the unit tests. I don't even have time to look at 1,000 lines of code changes. Why are you doing such large batches? Check the box and move on. So you get really bad behavior on both ends of that spectrum. And then even in the happy medium, and I talked about it a little earlier, we see, yes, it's breaking down and creating empathy between the development team, the ops team, the security team, even the marketing team, right? I would say, like, there's a lot of components of software product release that need to be in Congress with each other, so you can really pull in, what's my marketing campaign going to be? Who are the right celebrity, like in the commercial world, who are the right folks that I need to engage at what time? When will it be ready? How do I highlight the features in a way that's going to reach this audience versus that audience? The language models, understanding those personas is really great. But what really drives developers nuts is a ambiguous standard of style, of coding style, especially on a team that is, at least at any point in time, going to be 50% people who are new within the last 5 years as they're coming up to speed. And you start to see these little cast systems or these clicks, almost like sixth grade. Like my oldest daughter's in middle school, so that's a perfect anecdote, right?
Report to the principal's office.
Exactly. And so it really helps flatten out the kind of hierarchy that used to exist in waterfall. So you'd have I'm the senior engineer, in my opinion, counts as 6 votes on the code review. That's no more, right? Because now you have objectivity baked in. It allows everyone to show up badgeless and be an equal part of the team, and it's really exciting.
So, Joel, Bob just used an interesting phrase, 1,000 lines of code. So John Gilroy writes 1,000 lines of code. Bob writes 3 lines of code. Who is more effective? And how do you evaluate that, right? I mean, this is the federal government. It's got to be good. It's 1,000 lines there, you know? Well, not necessarily, huh?
As somebody who's been part of a lot of code reviews over the years, please don't write 1,000 lines of code and then give it to me, okay? That's not going to work. I think what's interesting is this kind of gets us to the point of, well, I mean, we're talking about AI, we're talking about development, we're talking about code review. It's what is AI doing in that space? That's kind of the big question that's an outlier at the moment of, well, okay, I have developers at multiple levels of experience. They know things at different levels. And how are they leveraging AI, or how's AI helping us in the process? And so whether it's kind of a stand-in team member that's helping us with code review, or if it's the assistant or the paired programming type of person, right? It kind of fills that role with our developers. It's going to have a very different role based on the amount of experience. And to Bob's point, anybody who's, in their first couple of years especially is going to lean on that AI assistant one way, whereas somebody who's been coding for a long time is going to lean on it very differently, and they're going to get very different outcomes because of what AI is and how it expects you to interact with it, or how you tell it you're going to interact with it, even more interestingly. And so it creates this interesting dynamic, right, where everybody's voice can be heard. And it's all come from a little bit different context inside of this ecosystem.
So, Bob, we just heard from Joel there. So are you using GitLab Duo to accomplish these tasks?
So we're not yet using GitLab Duo. We're excited about both GitLab Duo and what's coming soon. It was announced today at the DevSecOps World Tour around both the standalone, dedicated tenancy, single tenant SaaS approach, moving towards FedRAMP moderate. Very excited to hear that. In terms of a DFARS compliant, CMMC compliant company, that's a really important accomplishment that we're going to be closely tracking to, of how we can adopt Duo more holistically across the company. We are using private models internally, and so then what's coming also announced today, coming to generally available here in Q4, it sounds like, is the private model integration into Duo. And so we as a private company or the federal government in public sector can have the strength and power of the models that they're comfortable with, all within their bounds, trained and fine-tuned on their own data. So it not only gives you the benefit of having AI, it now gives you the context of the mission set that you're going after within a secure boundary. So you get the benefits of AI in that kind of air-gapped single tenancy mode. And that's where SAIC as a company has really been leaning in, and what we call operationalizing AI for the federal government. How do you take the power of what's available on the commercial internet and bring it to the government in a way that's secure, and secure enough even up through higher classification levels, which is really exciting. I will also just, something Joel said about kind of the whole ecosystem and the other part of GitLab's offering that's so compelling to me, because it really leans into where I think the future of this is going, is into large action models, agentic models, and workflows, where you no longer just have this request and response sort of synchronous relationship. You get this asynchronous agent and cluster of agents in your ecosystem, which can each serve different purposes and chain together things in a workflow, in a life cycle. So there was the equivalent, I would say, is instead of having to say spell check, now I get my spelling errors underlined in red as I'm typing. I get my grammatic errors underlined in blue. And even in most word processing products, you'll now start to get suggestions of your tone is bad, right? It's the same way with DevSecOps ecosystem. If the model is aware of the architectural spec that you're working within, it can start to say, hey, you're starting to get out of bounds of what the original intent of the system of systems architecture is trying to do. You get that now feedback as you're writing code, and you can say, well, what would you suggest? Like, don't just poke me in the eye and say you spelled that wrong, and I got to figure out how to get it close enough so it's going to autocorrect myself. I'm a terrible speller. So
in other words, even Joel can use it.
I wasn't going to go. No, I'm just but yeah, no, it's very exciting.
So if you are interested in learning more, you can go to GitLab.com, and there's a link there I'll put in the show notes and get more information, especially about the public sector and GitLab and artificial intelligence. When I look at you two, you could talk for hours about artificial intelligence and applying it, but there are some people that may resist, and some people may, it's part of the process is learning about it. And during your talk this morning, I think you said something like, yeah, we got human beings that work at SAIC, and we're trying to gently introduce the concept of how they can use AI. But the same thing's true in the federal government. The federal government knows that it's valuable, but you have to introduce it. And in Georgetown, they have a hackathon, but SAIC has a promptathon? What's that anyway?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's trying to lower the barrier. We found a lot, when we pose things as a hackathon, we generally attract a wide array of technical talent who understand that this is either a hackathon, where we're doing a capture the flag, or a hackathon of innovative ways to solve a government customer problem. And we do this usually in partnership with different universities so that we get kind of a public-private partnership, and in the context of one of our larger mission IT programs like a Cloud One or a T-Cloud. But Promptathon is something we piloted this year, is trying to make it so that the barrier for entry, so people aren't filtering themselves out, right? That say, oh, that's clearly for the technologist. That's not for me in the finance org. That's not for me in contracts. That's not for me in HR. And so what we found is by kind of creating that lower friction point, meeting that part of the workforce where they're at, they're starting to get a lot more understanding of how the tools could be applied. Like Joel said, different personas are going to get different use out of the tool. And then the use of the tool gives us feedback in where do we have gaps. We're seeing a potential opportunity for efficiencies here, for higher productivity here. Where do we as a company want to invest strategically to improve? Joel,
the tech part's easy. You're going to have the hard part right now. It's called human beings.
Oh, boy.
We touched on that a little bit with Bob. So what are the key considerations for deploying AI models in government environments, particularly in terms of security, privacy, and accountability?
There's so much to be said about this. And clearly legislation is following along with that, right? That's where we're seeing a lot of activity saying, hey, well, where'd that model come from? Where'd that data come from? And can you prove that to me? And I think that's going to be a huge question going forward. What we're starting to see, though, and one thing I just believe that GitLab does really well, is disclosure, transparency. What is it that the AI engine is doing? Where is it engaging? How is it engaging? What's the data retention? Is it learning anything from my inputs or my outputs into that engine? What models are we using? What are their terms? A lot of it is third party upon third party. And so when you start accessing these systems, are they held to the same standard that you're holding yourself to? And that's the kind of question that has to be asked. And so what we're seeing is a lot of the industry leaders are coming out and saying, yeah, we're engaging these systems to provide these features and these functionalities to you, and here's what our compliance statement looks like. And it's really important at a procurement stage especially to say, this is something that we can trust, or we don't know. And I don't know of anybody who's going to pull the trigger on we don't know. So it's forcing that software liability thing to start to become an AI-specific liability statement. And so as we see AI transparency centers pop up on websites for software creators all over the place, I think that's going to be a really important step going forward. And then the legislation will continue to drive more around model bias, more around model learning, more around the transparency of where in the world did all this data come from, and is it going to serve me well?
So, Bob, I want you to take off your CTO hat and put on your consultant hat and get to work here. I saw a press release. I think this is really, really important to talk about. DHS hires first 10 experts in AI core recruiting sprint. Apparently, like 1,500 people applied, and they're trying to grow a group of 50. So let's say you put your consulting, and you sit down with these 10 and say, well, I've made a lot of mistakes, and if I were you guys, here's what I'd avoid doing. And so what advice is like the older to the younger Bob? So what advice would you give these 10 experts?
So I'm going to start with a generic parable that it was given to me, thankfully, while I was an intern at SAIC 2 decades ago. And it's what I tell anybody earlier in their career or even later in their career. And I really appreciate there was a retired Navy captain, Tom DeVille, who told it to me on my first day. He said, one, always be working yourself out of a job, right? Because if you can't work yourself out of your current job, you'll never free yourself up for all the future opportunities. And two, 10 years from now, make sure you look back and had 10 years of experience, not 1 year of experience 10 times, which I know is a cliche, but it really opened my eyes in terms of how can I keep a balance on solving problems today, but leaning into what can I automate away so I never have to do that again. And I make the joke all the time about software developers. We're a lazy bunch, meaning anything we can automate, we're going to automate. In fact, sometimes we'll automate something that could have been done manually in 5 minutes. We'll spend 8 hours automating it just so we never have to do that 5 minutes again. And as long as it's applied in the right way. So that would be the advice I would give, specifically around AI core, and that the automating something in 8 hours that could be done in 5 minutes. Now, if that's 5 minutes that occurs 10 times a day, every day for the rest of your life, that's good value. But that's really what I would say for an AI core at any organization is make sure you're looking at more even the traditional value stream within your organization and applying automation and applying AI to the painful parts of the problems, yes, but really to the problems that are going to not just automate away something that happens once in a lifetime, because you'll spend a lot of energy, and coming out the other side, you won't get that broad adoption because people will say, so what? You automated something that only happens twice a year.
So, Joel, I put you in front of these 10 people, AI core, and you have to give them what you've learned, your experience. And I'm going to quote a gentleman from this morning. And this morning, a gentleman said, you got to get velocity to value. There's that T-shirt for you, huh? Maybe that's the SIC T-shirt. Bob said it this morning. And maybe what he's talking about, the Navy caps say, look, you got to have value quickly. You can't do the same thing every 10 years. And so what would you tell these 10?
Oh, I've got a lot of things to say, but I think I'll focus on two things. One is when you talk about velocity to value, there's two things that pop up in my mind. One is the idea of a just-in-time education, right? We still have humans all over the loop. We're the gatekeepers. We're the owners of these processes, regardless of what Gen AI may think, even in its autonomous form. We want people to be able to capture quickly what information they need when they need it to do the activity they need to do. And I think that's a really good service that AI can provide. The other thing it can provide is a proper application of AI yielding the results you need for a given environment. All models aren't the same. All environments aren't the same. And so leveraging AI in a custom manner and not expecting that one model or one approach is going to work is a good way to go about it. So look at everything from the high level. Don't look at it as what do we have to apply and how do we apply it. Stay at that high level, understand the application, step back from it, and customize your implementations accordingly.
Well, we're running out of time. If you're listening to this podcast, I'll put a link in the show notes to the GitLab information for public sector. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guests, Joel Kruzbik, Federal CTO of GitLab, and Bob Ritchie, Chief Technology Officer at SAIC.